Hello, and welcome to the U.S. History Underground. I'm Mr. O'Hagan, and I'm here with Mr. Zagari.
How we doing, folks?
Today on the Underground, rock and roll in the 1950s, how music helped define a new generation. We're going to run this podcast a little differently today. The subject matter is a great crossover to, and specifically inspired by, Mr. Zagari's soundtracks course. To that end, we're going to run it more like an interview, relying on Mr. Zagari's love and passion for music and Mr. O's cool, detached, Emmy Award winning interviewer like skills. So, Zags, why don't we start with a little context?
Sure. So, what we're seeing here in numerous films and TV series is the 1950s are depicted as a period that marked the rise of a fresh, new American culture. This decade is often remembered for commemorating the triumph of World War II, the emergence of a youth movement, the idolized nuclear family, and the general prosperity in the United States.
But beneath that facade, Zags, lurked Cold War anxieties that laid the groundwork for a politically and economically complex America, contrasting the suburban ideal and the Leave It to Beaver image. The political and economic climate of the era, combined with the cultural shifts that had begun back in the 1920s, like religion versus modernity and expanded roles for women, those were playing pivotal roles in the rise of rock and roll as a defining element of American identity for younger generations. So, Zags, what is it about the music of this era that helps define the era?
Well, the musical landscape of this era will be significantly influenced by the culture of teenagers. For the first time in history, teenagers are emerging as a distinct audience in the realm of music. Advancements in technology played a pivotal role once again in bringing about this change. The introduction of the transistor radio provided teenagers with a portable music option, while the availability of the 45 RPM record allowed them to purchase and enjoy singles. These developments were driven by the rise in disposable income and the growth of consumer culture post World War II. It marked a movement towards independence for teenagers as these baby boomers began to define their own place in history.
So, where do we begin, Zags? Which artists are prime examples of this redefinition of American society?
Well, thinking about this, I think we need to really start with Elvis. I mean, he's the king of rock before there was Michael Jackson, the king of pop. I
Yeah.
mean, he's the bridge. He brings in this teen audience. As early as 1954, he's connecting country, blues, bluegrass to this new genre, and he's bringing in that electric stage presence. The overt sexuality of shaking his hips, the unbuttoned tie, the colorful jackets. He's also bringing in black cultural overtones to white America. The things that were seen in black jazz clubs are now part of Elvis's show and on TV when he appears on the Milton Berle show in 1956 and in American living rooms. Hound Dog, which is what he sung on the show, was actually a big Mama Thornton song, an African American blues and R&B singer.
And this is kind of a race mixing that's representative of the overall era, too, isn't it? These are kids who watched Jackie break the color barrier in baseball in 1947. They see the Supreme Court hand down Brown versus the Board of Ed in 54.
And we saw this same mixing in the jazz age of the 1920s. Once again, music works as a bridge between the races.
So, how else does Elvis represent a cultural shift?
Well, he's branching out. Think of the movies that he's making in the 1950s: Love Me Tender in 56, Jailhouse Rock in 57, Blue Hawaii in 61. He's more than just a singer on the radio. He's on television, he's in the movies. He's his own brand and he plays himself in all of these roles.
Boy,
He's Elvis.
yeah, but he's really the Taylor Swift of his era, or maybe what we really need to say is that she's the Elvis of her era,
Oh,
or eras.
you said you went there.
Yeah, I did. So Elvis is important not so much for his music, but how he really changes the idea of a star. He really is the first rock star. So what's next, Zags? If Elvis is the style, who's the substance?
Well, then we got to go with Chuck Berry. And the popular tune Brown Eyed Handsome Man delves into the racial challenges of this era while serving as a platform for self expression for Chuck Berry. And what Chuck Berry is he's bringing in this entirely new element to what is now being dubbed rock and roll. This song was launched in 1956, a year following Emmett Till's tragic murder and 2 years post the Brown decision. The song spotlights unjust incarcerations in the African American and Hispanic communities in California, which experienced a surge in population due to its Sunbelt migration. It steered away from the typical teen focus hits like Roll Over Beethoven and Johnny Be Good, and galvanized Barry as a crossover artist, appealing to both white and black listeners. Not surprisingly, it clinched the fifth spot in the R&B Top 40 list, which predominantly attracted black adult audiences throughout the decade.
That's a nice work on that song, Zag. Sounds like you're doing some intended audience sourcing right
Ah,
there.
I wake up with sourcing on my mind, Mr. O'Hagan. It's
That
just what we do.
that's a problem for you, but yeah, go ahead.
But, back to Chuck. Berry songs is loaded with political undertones that resonated with black adults. I mean, listen to these lyrics. With nobody on the count, he hit a high flying shot into the stands, rounding third as he sprinted for home. It was a handsome man with brown eyes who clinched the game. This lyric showcased black triumphs, notably honoring Jackie
Of
Robinson.
course,
I
Jackie.
mean, we got to go. I mean, this is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Despite its success in the R&B genre, the song failed to break into the mainstream pop charts of the decade, which was dominated by suburban white listeners. Barry understood that to thrive in the political and social climate of the time, relying solely on politically charged songs wouldn't suffice. His unique brand of rock and roll, rich in raw blues influence, had to maintain its focus on capturing the teenage audience, similar to what Elvis was doing,
Right.
as they were the primary consumers of music records. Ironically, the song's legacy would resonate over time with artists like Buddy Holly and Johnny Rivers, both who were staples in the early pop music scene, but also from artists such as Waylon Jennings, who was a traditional country artist in the 70s. While the lyrics spoke to the black community, the structure and musicality of the song spoke to everyone.
So that's where I want to just target a little bit next here, Zags. In what way is Chuck Berry the substance to Elvis's style? How is he musically arguably more important than Elvis?
Well, what Chuck Berry does is he brings in this notion of the electric guitar and the idea of this new guitar solo, so to speak. The way that song is composed and the composition and the arrangements of songs are all credited to Chuck Berry. The intro to Johnny Be Good is as iconic as any rock and roll song ever was. Everyone began looking for that kind of hook.
Mhm.
Musically, without Chuck Berry, you don't have the Beatles. The
Right,
Beatles
right.
credit everything to Chuck Berry.
What's the Lennon quote you told me about
Oh,
before?
if rock and roll had another name, it would be Chuck Berry.
Boy, I mean, that's
I mean,
John Lennon,
that's
right? I
John
mean,
Lennon.
yeah,
So for that, and in this time period too, not to go deep in the weeds on the guitar, but
okay.
you also have Les Paul creating the first solid body guitar through Gibson, and this new age of rock and roll that's becoming electrified is really starting to come into the open market.
All right, well, Zags, that gives us two great examples from the era, but we always like having a third when we do our essay writing. So, is there another artist that you would want to highlight here?
Well, Mr. Hagen, not another artist per se, but let's go into a different genre. And that genre we're going to go into is doo wop.
Okay.
And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame classifies doo wop as DIY music.
Yeah.
This genre of music originated in the urban areas of the United States during the 50s and was adaptable to performances in various settings, ranging from barbershops to street corners.
Interesting that you say it's an urban thing, because to me it has that kind of old backcountry feel, doesn't it? You're making music with whatever you have around, empty jugs, Coleman wax paper, or just old school a cappella around the fire barrel at night, right?
That's exactly what we have here. It's a continuity over time theme. The evolution of doo-wop as a substance of rock and roll was quite simple. As musical instruments secured costs, individuals belonging to the working class in urban areas who couldn't afford instruments but enjoyed the new sounds on AM radio began utilizing their voices collectively. Singers substituted musical instruments and supporting bands with their vocals, producing diverse harmonies. Although doo-wop was initially more prominent in the black community, featuring artists like the
Yeah.
Monotones, known for the Book of Love.
Oh, sure.
Yup. White urban areas also witnessed doo-wop artists in the 1960s. Many Italian immigrants, think Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, were part of that surge.
Isn't that the Jersey Boys
The Jersey Boys
boy,
on
right? Yeah,
Broadway,
yeah.
absolutely. Doo-wop served as a socio-cultural reflection of this time, empowering teenagers, once again, teenagers are coming up, to compose music free of charge and enabling music to be a means of expressing the environment around them. Doo-wop subsequently laid the groundwork for blue-eyed soul and Motown subgenres of the 1960s.
We still see a lot of that influence today, don't we?
I'd say the connections between doo-wop of the 1950s and the hip hop of the 1970s to this present day of hip hop are absolutely clear. In addition, we are making music free of charge with our phones via SoundCloud and other means of digital recording. The more things change, Mr. O'Hagan, the more things stay the same.
So true. So why is doo-wop your third example? How is it representative of the era?
It's access. Access for everyone, regardless of race or ethnicity. It's a kind of democratization.
Yeah.
Talent, who cares? No instruments or a studio? Big deal. It's the kind of access that is represented today by TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. I mean, we live in an era of our own television and media studios right in our
Right,
hands.
mini empires, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a neighborhood social media. Black neighborhoods, white neighborhoods, ethnic neighborhoods. It doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
and suburban or urban neighborhoods, right? I mean, it's geographically impactful too. Music serves as a bridge for all of these communities in the post-war era, and this generation will continue to embrace rock and roll as it evolves all throughout the 1960s, which if we're talking about 60s music, that is definitely another podcast for another day.
Oh, that's definitely going to be a sequel. We have to go there.
Yeah, okay, so I guess we should redefine this one as part 1.
Part one.
That'll get added to the title change maybe if we think about it. Well, that's all for us today. We hope you enjoyed the slight twist on the podcast and the slightly more interview style. Be sure to use this YouTube channel for its content spotlights, unit reviews, A Push on the Road segments, and other spectacular podcasts. We'll see you next time on the U.S. History Underground.
Okay, so here's a little bonus feature to add on to our discussion on rock and roll in the 1950s. So, me being a music gearhead, I thought I would give a little insight into the development of the electric guitar during this time period. So, I mentioned it before that Les Paul developed the solid body guitar. So, I wanted to go into a little bit more detail as part of this new bonus feature in our podcast. So, the Les Paul solid body electric guitar revolutionized music by offering musicians a new level of control, sustain, and versatility. Its design allowed for louder volumes without feedback, paving the way for genres like rock and roll. The sustain and clarity of the notes also enabled new playing techniques and styles, influencing the sound of countless musicians across various genres, from blues and jazz to rock and beyond. In essence, the Les Paul guitar played a pivotal role in shaping the sound of modern popular music. Clearly, we see this with the popularity of rock and roll in the 1950s, with the advent of AM radio and automobiles and transistor radios, and most notably now, rock and roll being televised across the nation. So, our little tribute to Les Paul and his solid body electric guitar. Keep rocking.